Okay, so you want to own a shooting range. Find a building, put up some targets, charge people by the hour, and watch the money roll in. People love guns, people love shooting, the industry is enormous, and from the outside, it honestly looks like one of the simplest businesses in America. You build the lanes, customers show up, and you collect the cash. And that version of the story is true for about the first 5 minutes of your research. Because then you pull back the curtain, and what you find is not a simple recreation business. What you find is an industrial facility disguised as a hobby shop, sitting on top of one of the most expensive and legally complicated cost structures in all of retail. And today we are going to walk through every single number, every hidden expense, and every trap door in the floor, until you understand exactly what it actually takes to own a shooting range, and whether the person on the other side of all that investment ever actually makes money. Let us start with the first decision, because it shapes everything that comes after. Before you sign a lease or buy a single piece of equipment, you have to answer one question. Are you building indoors or outdoors? This is not a preference decision. This is an economic identity decision. The two models operate in entirely different financial universes, and choosing wrong does not just affect your opening costs. It affects your ability to survive. An indoor range offers something invaluable. It keeps operating regardless of whether it is raining, snowing, or 100 degrees outside. That year-round reliability is the foundation of predictable cash flow. Customers can book lanes in December the same way they do in July. Membership revenue stays consistent. Classes run on schedule. From a business standpoint, indoor is the more controllable model. But that control comes at a price that most people are not prepared for. An indoor facility is not a warehouse with targets pinned to the walls. It is a purpose-built industrial structure, and the engineering requirements are extreme. The walls must contain high-velocity projectiles. The ceilings must deflect errant rounds. The air must be continuously filtered and exhausted at a rate fast enough to keep lead particles away from the people pulling the triggers. And every one of those requirements costs serious money to build correctly. An outdoor range, on the other hand, uses the earth itself as the containment system. Earthen berms absorb bullets. Open air disperses sound. The construction costs are dramatically lower than an indoor build. But the trade-offs are severe. Revenue disappears whenever the weather turns. Noise complaints from neighbors are a permanent legal threat. Environmental regulators watch outdoor soil conditions obsessively. And over time, the land itself becomes contaminated with lead that you are legally required to manage and remediate. The savings on construction can be entirely consumed by a decade of environmental compliance costs. Now let us talk about where you actually build this thing, because location is not just a real estate decision. It is a volume decision. A shooting range needs customers, which means it needs people nearby, but it also needs separation from residential neighborhoods, which means it cannot be in the middle of a city. This creates one of the most persistent economic tensions in the entire business. Land close to customers costs more, triggers more opposition at the zoning board, and requires more expensive noise mitigation. Land far from customers is cheaper and quieter, but the driving distance alone will kill your weekday walk-in traffic and make your building feel empty on Tuesday afternoons, when the debt payment is still due the same as it is on a busy Saturday. The ranges that figure this out tend to settle on industrial-zoned corridors near major highways. Close enough to a metro area to attract recreational shooters, far enough from residential streets to get through the permitting process without a 3-year legal battle. But that particular combination of factors, industrial zoning plus highway access plus population density within a reasonable drive, that is not easy to find. And when you find it, you pay for it. The land or lease becomes a permanent anchor on your cost structure from the first month you open. Now we get to the number that tends to stop most first-time buyers in their tracks. The cost to build a compliant, modern indoor shooting range is substantially higher than almost any other retail business of equivalent square footage. A basic 10-lane facility, nothing fancy, just lanes, ventilation, bullet containment, a small retail counter, and restrooms, will realistically cost somewhere between $4 million and $6 million by the time you are done. A mid-sized 12-lane facility with a proper retail showroom, a training classroom, and quality equipment typically lands between $4 million and $10 million. And a large destination facility, the kind that looks like a premium experience and attracts corporate events and new shooter programs, can run $8 million all the way up to $20 million. Let us break that down because the numbers deserve some unpacking. The building shell itself, the raw construction of walls and roof and floor, runs between roughly $77 and $139 per square foot for standard commercial construction. But a shooting range is not standard commercial construction. Once you start installing the range-specific equipment, You are entering a completely different cost category. A 10-lane equipment package covering the bullet traps, the automated target retrieval systems, the shooting stalls, and the overhead baffles starts at roughly $468,000 just for the equipment itself. That is about $47,000 per lane before installation. Installation adds another 30% on top of that figure. The bullet traps alone, which are engineered steel assemblies that safely decelerate and capture projectiles, can run between $15,000 and $40,000 per lane, depending on the specification, and that is before you have touched the most expensive hidden system in the entire facility, the ventilation system. This is the piece of infrastructure that most outsiders never even consider, and it is frequently the single largest line item on the construction budget. A proper indoor ventilation system for a 10-lane range can easily cost between $200,000 and $750,000. And this is not optional. Without it, you legally cannot operate. Here is why. When a firearm is discharged, it releases a cloud of microscopic lead particles and combustion gases into the air at the firing line. These particles are invisible, they are toxic, and they settle onto every surface in the range if the air is not moving correctly. Federal occupational health regulations require that the air at the shooting position be moving downrange, away from the shooter, at a minimum velocity of 75 feet per minute at all times the range is hot. That means continuous, powerful airflow from behind the shooter toward the backstop, filtered through industrial HEPA systems before the air can be exhausted outside. The blower motors required to move that volume of air are enormous. They are the same class of industrial equipment used in manufacturing facilities. They require upgraded three-phase electrical service that most commercial buildings do not have. They run constantly whenever the range is open. And the HEPA filter banks they push air through are expensive to purchase and expensive to replace on a regular schedule. Customers see a clean, brightly lit lane. They do not see the $500,000 mechanical system working invisibly above the ceiling tiles to keep the air in that lane legally safe to breathe. Before we go any further, if you are finding this breakdown genuinely useful, take a second and subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It helps more people find content like this, and there is a lot more to cover. Now, alongside the ventilation system and the building construction, a prospective owner must budget for a range of regulatory and compliance costs that begin before the first customer ever walks through the door. To legally sell or rent firearms, the facility needs a federal firearms license. Getting that license requires an application process and approval from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and it subjects the business to ongoing inspections and record-keeping requirements for every single firearm transaction that takes place on the premises. Local jurisdictions add their own layers. Zoning permits, special use authorizations, noise ordinances, and certificates of occupancy, each of which requires professional assistance to navigate and takes time, which means the debt clock is running on your construction loan before you have generated a single dollar. Occupational health regulations from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration specifically govern lead exposure in shooting ranges. Those regulations require the business to implement hygiene protocols, install decontamination stations, and conduct regular blood lead level testing for employees who work in the range environment. The fines for violating these lead exposure standards start at $15,625 per violation. These are not hypothetical risks. They are routine inspection findings at facilities that cut corners on their safety programs. Now let us talk about insurance, because this is one of those expenses that produces absolutely nothing visible, and yet without it, the business cannot legally operate for a single day. A commercial general liability policy for a mid-sized indoor range typically costs between $30,000 and $80,000 per year. That is a monthly insurance bill of roughly $2,500 to $6,600 before the first customer arrives. The underwriters who write these policies look at everything: claims history, training protocols, geographic location, whether the facility offers advanced tactical courses or sticks to basic static line shooting. A range that lets customers run and shoot, or hosts law enforcement training, carries a fundamentally different liability profile than one where people stand still and fire at paper. Higher risk operations push premiums higher, and there is no negotiating these costs down to zero because a lawsuit stemming from an injury on your property or from a weapon sold from your retail counter can easily reach 7 figures. So now we have the building, the equipment, the ventilation, the regulatory compliance, and the insurance. And we have not made a single dollar yet. Let us start talking about revenue. The most basic transaction in the shooting range business is a customer paying for time on the lane. Walk-in rates at established ranges currently sit somewhere between $25 and $50 per hour per lane, depending on the market and the quality of the facility. That sounds straightforward, but the lane rental fee is only the beginning of what a well-run facility extracts from each customer visit. The metric that actually measures whether a range is succeeding is not how many customers came through the door. It is how much gross profit was generated per occupied lane hour. A weak facility where customers bring their own ammunition, skip the targets, and leave after shooting might generate $45 of gross profit from an hour of lane time. A well-run facility that attaches a sale of paper targets, sells premium ear protection rentals, and guides the customer toward an accessory purchase in the retail showroom might generate $90 to $120 of gross profit from that same hour. The physical space is identical. The revenue generated is more than double. To address the volatility of walk-in traffic, which swings wildly between weekday afternoons and weekend afternoons, most modern ranges have moved aggressively toward membership programs. A typical membership at an indoor range currently runs between $39 and $69 per month. For that fee, the member gets unlimited or heavily discounted access to the lanes and priority booking over walk-in customers. For the business, memberships are extremely attractive